First, we'll start off with a quick round of introductions. I'll introduce myself in a little more depth and my colleague who's on the line with us today as well. And then we'll talk just about Taproot, who we are, what we do. Some of you might be familiar with us. Some of you might not be so familiar with us. I will shout out also like our online marketplace, which is a way to get hooked up with support from Skill volunteers. Then we'll set the stage by talking about our core 5 principles for great pro bono work. We believe that is something that applies to all pro bono projects at all times, and everyone should always be thinking about those core principles before, after, and during any pro bono engagement. Then we're basically going to give you a crash course on the various phases of good project management for pro bono projects. And I think it's the phases of good project management for really any project, but in particular, we want to hook you up with all the basics you should be hitting when you are managing a pro bono engagement with a skilled volunteer. We'll also have time for Q&A. So if you have any questions that I maybe didn't answer during the duration of this presentation, please drop those in the Q&A box. My colleague who's on the line is going to help direct those over to me at the very end. And then we'll follow up with you via email with some extra resources. And if you want to stay in touch with us, you'll be able to do that as well. So I've introduced myself, but I also want to introduce my colleague, Kristen, who's with us today. Hi, Kristen.
Hi, Josh. Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name is Kristen Maiku. I'm on the marketing and communications team here at Taproot. And today for this webinar, as Josh mentioned, I'll be active in the chat. So if you all have questions or comments throughout the webinar, I'll be there and making sure they're seen and answered by either Josh or myself.
Thank you, Kristen, for helping us with logistics today. Always a big help for presenting. And now that we've introduced ourselves here on the Taproot end, I'd like for you all to take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat if you feel comfortable. If you're with a nonprofit, we'd love to hear a little bit about your nonprofit. Tell us, who you are, where you're from, and if your nonprofit has a LinkedIn presence or a website that you want to boost out. These chat spaces can be great networking opportunities. If you see a nonprofit that works in a similar issue area or is just something you're interested in. So please take the time to introduce yourselves in the chat. We love seeing where everyone's from, what their nonprofits are working on. So we're going to introduce ourselves as a nonprofit here very quick. Looks like we got our kind of first takers. Hi, everyone. Habitat for Humanity, Bloomington, Illinois. Hi, Tariq. If you're a volunteer, if you would like to, tell us who you are, where you're from, and what your professional superpower is. So what skill, are you interested in donating on a pro bono basis or have donated on a pro bono basis? And if you have LinkedIn and you want to share that out with everyone, data analysis, cool. Yeah, it looks like we got some great responses coming in. So we love just seeing everyone who's here. We do actually keep a record of our chat as well. So it's not just kind of going into the void. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. Yeah, like I said, if you're a volunteer, drop your information if you have a web page or LinkedIn, and what your professional strong suit is. We love hearing from you and having a very active chat. Yeah, so thanks for kind of helping us with a round of introductions there. I really want to touch on very quickly Taproot and kind of who we are. So Taproot ourselves, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are a nonprofit that helps other nonprofits. We empower mission-driven organizations by mobilizing skilled volunteers to advance resource equity. What that really means is all of our programming is dedicated to linking nonprofit leaders up with skilled volunteers. Sometimes you'll hear us call them pro bono consultants or pro bono providers, people with professional skill sets, whether it be graphic design, marketing, communications, information technology, HR, or business strategy and finance, all the skill sets that go under all of those big practice areas. We link nonprofit leaders up in all of our programming with professional resources that are donated on a pro bono basis. So some of you probably know or are already active on our online marketplace called Taproot Plus. Taproot Plus is one of the main ways we achieve our mission. It is a completely free to use and accessible online marketplace, really a matchmaking space online for skilled volunteers, people with professional skill sets that they want to donate, and nonprofit organizations who are looking to get projects done with a skilled volunteer. So if you haven't actually scoped that out yet, and maybe you're coming into this completely new, you'll see a ribbon at the top of your screen where you can access Taproot Plus and take a look at it. Like I said, chances are many of you are already here because you have Taproot Plus accounts, or maybe embarking on your first projects or thinking about posting projects to our marketplace. So some of you probably know a lot about Taproot Plus already, but if you're brand new, and if you're a nonprofit or a volunteer, check out Taproot Plus as our kind of main resource for getting pro bono done. So that's kind of who we are and what we do. So like I promised, I do want to just start off the kind of curriculum portion of our presentation with talking about the 5 principles of great pro bono work. So some of you might be embarking on your first projects that you might have sourced a skilled volunteer off of Taproot Plus with. Some of you might be thinking about posting projects. We think these 5 principles are relevant kind of at any point in the process. So you want to always keep these in the back of your mind. And we think kind of that landing a successful project, if you're managing a pro bono engagement for the first time, really starts here with these 5 core principles of great pro bono work. So really the first core principle is for nonprofits, but this also applies to skilled volunteers as well, is for the nonprofit to act like a paying client. And we kind of call this the golden rule of pro bono. Approach all projects like you would a paid partnership with a vendor or a contractor, which means both parties should commit to deadlines, give direct and honest feedback, and hold each other accountable for project goals. As a project leader, you should hold your own team accountable for setting up your skilled volunteer for success if you're working on the nonprofit side. Take the prep work really seriously, invest time internally before the project to gather feedback, materials, and buy-in. Before sourcing skilled volunteers for any project, the nonprofit should make sure to have the relevant staff and board buy-in so that you're ready to hit the ground running. And for volunteers, similarly, this project will potentially be a part of the skilled volunteer's work history and resume. So they want to be able to provide you with the best service possible as a nonprofit and will appreciate the actionable feedback to improve their final product. So skilled volunteers should also treat every engagement like it was a for-pay engagement, because this is potentially a part of your CV. It's a part of your resume. Holding yourself and the team and your nonprofit partner, and if you're a nonprofit, your skilled volunteer partner accountable for developing a high-quality deliverable helps everyone feel motivated throughout the project and really proud of the ultimate outcome. The second best principle or best practice to think about for all pro bono engagements is know and identify your needs. So on the nonprofit side, this sounds like something really simple, but can actually be more difficult than you might think. You don't want to rush this part of the process. Take time to assess your challenges with your own team. Try to look for root causes rather than just symptoms, and take a crack at defining the problem and then developing a proposed solution to the problem. Your proposed project, if you're a nonprofit, should center around just some kind of core skill set. Sometimes bigger initiatives might require multiple skill sets, which might mean partnering with more than one skilled volunteer and posting multiple projects. When initially designing your project, work with your internal team, the other people at your nonprofit, to create an implementation plan for whatever end product your skilled volunteer or pro bono provider is going to help deliver to you. Setting expectations on how staff members can use the product or deliverable will get people across your nonprofit excited about the upcoming project. You'll want to try and map the solutions that you come up with to this problem that is going to be kind of the core of your project back to your organization's priorities. This will set you up to make a really compelling and substantive pitch to a volunteer. If you're active on Taproot Plus, the first thing we ask you about is, okay, what do you want to get done on this project? What kind of pitch are you going to make? Then we have you kind of draft a project pitch. This is going to be the cornerstone of your project. So you want to make sure your premise is strong and that you can map the deliverable back to your mission, your vision, the things that are making people passionate about working with you. You'll also want to think about the pre-work that needs to get done. If you're interested, for example, in working with a data analyst, do you have the relevant data scrubbed and ready to go for them before you jump into the project? So we call this mapping out the dependencies. So what has to get done before this project is going to be ready? And sometimes when you're mapping out these dependencies, you find out that maybe you actually have a completely different project than the initial one you were thinking about. So that can also be a helpful exercise. Principle 3, get the right resource for the right job. So we recommend, for both nonprofits and skilled volunteers, pro bono providers, to be a part of kind of this co-vetting process. For the nonprofit, you should vet prospective skilled volunteers like you would anyone applying to work at your organization. It's perfectly reasonable to ask for CV, resume, references, and even examples of prior work if applicable. A lot of nonprofits structure the engagement by having the volunteer sign an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, or some kind of volunteer agreement. There's even some projects that might require the skilled volunteer to sign an NDA or confidentiality agreement, especially if the nonprofit is working with beneficiaries that kind of have sensitive data associated with them, or in particular, if it's an HR type of project. So that's completely reasonable as well. Again, you'll see that most of these go back to our golden rule of pro bono about structuring relationships that are pro bono along the same lines as you would a for-pay engagement. For nonprofits, you want to make sure that your prospective partner not only has the requisite skill set that you're looking for, but that they're a good culture fit for your organization. Do they understand your organization's mission, vision, and programs? And are they open to co-managing this project with you? Are they open to giving and receiving direct and honest feedback? Will they be able to contribute successfully in a virtual environment? For volunteers, we recommend only donating professional skills that you are really proficient in. Pro bono projects are generally not a great place to learn on the job or break in new skill sets that you're still learning. So you want to think really consciously and only donate skill sets that you're very confident in. Oftentimes a good baseline is having 3 years of either on the job or professional experience in whatever skill set you're thinking about donating. This ultimately helps the nonprofit, when they come to vetting as well. Number 4, be realistic about deadlines. Even small tasks or projects can take longer than expected when working with an external party. In many cases, your skilled volunteer, if you're a nonprofit, will need time to learn about the organization, receive relevant feedback, share updates. Active communication lines, obviously, I think are really key to the success of any project. And we've really tried to reinforce the idea that skilled volunteering is rarely a good solution for very urgent needs. So in a lot of cases, volunteers have their own full-time jobs. They're oftentimes working after hours or on the weekends on pro bono projects. This can tend to lengthen rounds of review time, feedback, and communication. So one of the trade-offs of pro bono is that these partnerships usually have an extended timeline. Again, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. That's something to think about. So if you have a critical need that's coming up really quick and it's like make or break for your organization, you might want to think about cultivating other avenues of support outside of pro bono resources, given that one of the trade-offs of pro bono is that it does take place on an extended timeline. And finally, for both parties, learning goes both ways. You and your volunteer expert or volunteer are both experts in your own fields, and you want to try and embrace that. Your volunteer partner will need to learn a lot about your organization and cause area to make the project a success. And be prepared to try and get them up to speed as a nonprofit. Background knowledge or issue area education that you take for granted might be brand new information to them. You should also enter volunteer partnerships ready to learn. You might find after input from a volunteer that the project's final product might change from what you originally envisioned it to be. So you want to try not to be overly prescriptive when pitching your organization's need to a prospective volunteer. You want to leave room for their perspective as well. And really, both the nonprofit beneficiary and the skilled volunteer, the pro bono provider, should aim to be students and teachers in this process. This is something you're co-managing together. So those are our 5 basic principles that we really advocate strongly to keep in mind for any pro bono project. Now I want to move us into, okay, what does successful project management actually look like when you start to do it? So we have kind of designed the rest of the presentation here to be a crash course in basic project management, and listing out all of the basic phases that you should aim to go through to structure your project. As a part of the resources that we'll send out to you in a follow-up email, we're also going to link you up with our pro bono project guide, which is actually a PDF that has a lot of this information in it as well, along with helpful checklists and tips and ideas, along with that map onto every phase of project management. So that's a great resource to take a look at after this presentation and kind of use in conjunction with this presentation. It's also a resource that we give you whenever you match with a project on Taproot Plus as well. So the first phase of any project that you're going to embark on is the kickoff phase. So what do we mean here by the kickoff phase? The purpose of a kickoff phase is to make sure that everyone involved in the project is clear about what will happen during the engagement. For pro bono projects, which are usually one-on-one, especially for Taproot Plus engagements, it's really critical to solidify the scope of the project during this kickoff phase. Good project management really begins right here. And oftentimes with the kickoff phase, just clarifying the scope is going to be one of the main goals. So the scope of your project goes beyond just the need statement that, for example, you might have posted on Taproot Plus describing what you wanted to get done. And it should be something that both you and the skilled volunteer agree on when you start to kick off the project. This is important because even if you've been, for example, thinking about a marketing plan long enough that you know exactly who you want the pro bono provider to interview, what 5 competitors they should review for materials, what timeline the plan should cover, and so on. You might not want to add these details to your scope document just yet because a potential skilled volunteer is going to want to be a part of defining that initial scope with you. So when you have a very strong kickoff, it leads to the best outcomes for preparing you for success on the project. We recommend having a meeting dedicated just to kicking off the project, where you agree on the scope, the timeline, communications preferences along the way with any immediate next steps that are going to happen right after that meeting. Strong kickoffs lead to the right work completed at the right time, trust and clear communications, greater impact on the community, and a overall stronger nonprofit and volunteer relationship. So one of the biggest things you're going to want to hammer out in a kickoff meeting is your scoping document, whatever that is. So both nonprofits and pro bono providers actually have access to a Taproot branded scoping document when you match on a project on Taproot Plus. It's under the match project resources on the project management page. We recommend filling this document out during your kickoff meeting and using it as an anchor. But in general, all scope documents are going to start with the simple, question of what is in scope. So in this section, you'll want to describe the activities or deliverables, specific chunks of work that will be accomplished during your partnership. Where possible, include specific estimates of the quantity or depth of activity at that step. So, for example, the number of interviews you're going to conduct as a pro bono provider during your process if you're going to be interviewing people during the discovery phase, which we'll get into. A well-defined scope created with the help of a skilled volunteer might describe the discovery process along terms like this. We will conduct up to 5 individual discovery interviews with 1 focus group with a maximum of 6 participants, with research conducted over the period of a month. You'll notice that this statement provides quantity, depth, and clear guardrails for both the nonprofit and the pro bono provider to follow. So this is how you should be thinking during the scoping process, really setting those guardrails and those limits around what you're going to do. Which brings us to the next part of a scoping document, defining what is out of scope. So what you won't do is oftentimes just as important as what you will do. You want to spell it out in clear and explicit terms what won't be accomplished during the engagement. This typically includes activities or goals that are closely related to or maybe commonly expected from a project of this type, but will not be delivered in this engagement. So let's say you and a graphic designer you partnered with are designing the visual elements of a new logo as a project. A well-defined out-of-scope item that you might create with the help of a skilled volunteer might read something like this. This project will not cover creation or preparation of a style guide, development or printing of new press kit materials, new business cards, or other collateral, any updates of any kind to any online or web-based resources, and will not produce logos for related programs or service beyond a single organization logo. You want to be really intentional in setting parameters to avoid what we call scope creep, where projects just keep kind of ballooning out and out and out in terms of what you're doing and then never seem to have an end goal in mind, which can lead to a lot of burnout. So establish these guardrails by keying in on what is going to be out of scope right at the beginning. The final part of your scoping document should include a logistics section. So both the nonprofit and pro bono provider should agree on an ideal timeline for the project, as well as any resources that must be present or provided to complete the project successfully. For example, the nonprofit might need to set up a printing distribution budget for a white paper that they're developing with a skilled volunteer. Those are the types of things that you'll want to start thinking about when you get to the logistics section. This is also the ideal time to agree to a check-in schedule and communications preferences. Are you communicating primarily by email? Do you want to open up a Slack channel? Are you have meetings on Zoom? If so, how often? Getting out in front of those things can clarify communications issues, which tend to be the #1 derailer of pro bono projects. So get in front of those with the logistics section of your scoping document. And finally, you want to make sure to establish some overall completion criteria that answers the question, how will you know when this project is complete? So an example of a completion criteria statement would be something like, this project is complete when the consultant has delivered the final selected logo, set written instructions, and completed staff training on how to use the logo in new marketing materials. That's an example. It's almost like the thesis statement of your project. So you want to have that completion criteria defined by the time you get to the end of your scoping document. Moving right ahead into the next phase of project management, the discovery phase. So we're borrowing some language here kind of from the legal field, but you are going to kind of really kick off the actual work by jumping into a discovery phase. So what is the purpose of a discovery phase? In this phase, the nonprofit is going to want to make sure the skilled volunteer gets to know the organization and your goals as an organization. Then conduct any additional research to gather the appropriate background for the project. So a good discovery process should be conversational and honest. The nonprofit should make sure that the pro bono provider is set up to do their job. The nonprofit needs to give them, in many cases, lots of pieces of information about the mission, history, and operations of their organization. The nonprofit should paint a detailed picture of their operations and help the provider understand the environment or issue area in which the nonprofit works. So there are really two main categories of information you should focus on in the discovery phase. One is general or organizational background information. And then the other is what we call project-specific information. So I'll give a few examples of what this actually looks like. General background items are things a nonprofit can provide to the skilled volunteer to educate them on the nonprofit's mission, vision, goals, and overall current position in their community. Educating the pro bono provider about the background of the organization and providing information about the issue area can be really engaging for the pro bono provider. So many times a skilled volunteer is interested in helping an organization because the issue area the nonprofit works in is something that is near and dear to their heart or that they feel passionate about. nonprofits can help feed motivations and build momentum by allowing access to lots of documents and other outreach materials to stimulate interest in really what the core mission and vision of the nonprofit is. In terms of project-specific examples, you'll want to ask what background information is available or related to the project that you want to link them up with. What documentation can the nonprofit provide that will help the pro bono provider gain a clear understanding of the project at hand? So think about what the project is focused on. What documentation or materials provide a clear picture of the department or part of the organization that the skilled volunteer is going to be working with, including current and past performance related to that part of your organization or that department. So let's say I'm a nonprofit leader working on a brochure design project with a graphic design expert. Some examples of project-specific items that a design consultant would need to achieve success on a project would be something like photos or illustrations the nonprofit has the rights to, other organizations' brochure examples, and other organizations' website examples that you want to kind of inspire them with, that maybe you admire and want to adapt for your organization. And any basic data about stakeholders, who you serve, who your corporate partners are, other organizations that you work with, community members that you collaborate with. Those are just some examples of project-specific background items that you will need to link up your skilled volunteer with. The kinds of discovery done will vary greatly depending on what kind of project is being done and what the ultimate scope is. These are just kind of a few examples of the different types of discovery you can do across all types of different projects. Remember, the ultimate goal of a discovery process is to get the skilled volunteer the information, context, and insights needed to develop your final deliverable. So different types of discovery will be more appropriate than others, but these are just some more examples across all kind of skilled areas of the types of things you might need to link a skilled volunteer up with. And if you're a skilled volunteer, these are things you should think about potentially asking for. And then finally, as a part of your discovery process, you are going to want to take the time to debrief on the discovery process and analyze key findings. So if possible, the skilled volunteer should try and present a synthesized or summarized, itemized list or summary of findings to the nonprofit. Remember that the right analysis should be a conversation, a presentation of assumptions and findings from the provider to the nonprofit client, and then feedback and redirecting from the nonprofit. This conversation is really critical as the pro bono provider will use the discovery results to determine the best direction for the upcoming drafting phase of the project. So the nonprofit needs to understand the assumptions the pro bono provider is taking while they're about to enter the next steps, which is the actual drafting phase of the project, which tees us up for the next phase of project management, which is the drafting phase. So in terms of what the purpose of a drafting phase is, once you've agreed on what the discovery results mean and have revised or confirmed the direction of the project with your skilled volunteer, then this is where the actual creation, development, or writing of the deliverable that you want to get done is going to take place. This is going to look fairly different from project to project, given the deliverable that you're working on. But there are some basic tips to keep in mind during the drafting phase that I want to go over with you. Again, highly variable, but these are some general guidelines for the drafting phase of your project. One, if you allow the project to move forward without informing the other party of any concerns that you might have, you could end up with frustration on both sides, drop-offs on either team, and the ultimate failure of the final product you're trying to create. Remember, clarify any loose ends you have from the discovery phase. It's kind of a speak now or forever hold your peace kind of situation. So re-upping that here a little bit before you start drafting. Then number two is kind of a tip that we'd like to give. When you created that scope document, you should have defined how many rounds of review or feedback opportunities this project is going to include. If you didn't include this information earlier, make sure to discuss it now. It's important to try and agree upfront about what feedback is expected at what times. make time to agree together on what type of review is going to be appropriate during the drafting phase. This will help make sure that the project is not, workshop to death, as we like to say, where it just kind of gets stuck in this review process. You'll want to aim to strike a balance between thoroughness and your ultimate timeline that you're trying to complete the project in. You'll also want to provide direct and honest feedback throughout the drafting phase that will ultimately improve the deliverable in the long run, and do it in a way that each party can interpret, digest, and build from. So to expand on this feedback section of the drafting phase, I want to talk a little bit about what good feedback actually looks like. So what does good feedback look like? Well, it looks like these 4 principles here. It comes in the form of questions rather than solutions. It addresses things that can be changed and improved or adapted that are actionable by both parties. It's informed by multiple perspectives, not just one person's, and is shared for consideration, but with final action agreed upon by both parties. So your feedback should be a consensus-driven process. We like to also compare this with what bad feedback looks like. And some of you probably experienced this before in your own jobs or projects, but you'll want to make sure to avoid this. Bad feedback is usually feedback that unilaterally decides the direction for the other party without their input, is not actionable or within the scope of the project, is maybe disorganized and passed along ad hoc in pieces, or is anything that changes the ultimate scope of the engagement. So remember these principles for good feedback, and remember also what bad feedback tends to look like, to kind of stay on a path for giving good feedback and receiving good feedback, whether you're the nonprofit or the skilled volunteer. These are really important principles that you're going to need to tap into for the drafting phase of your project. And then we get to phase 4, which is the delivery of the final product of whatever your project is. So the purpose of the delivery phase goes beyond what it sounds like. It sounds pretty simple. Here's the final product, right? But this is when the pro bono provider submits the final deliverable as agreed upon in the scope of work that you both decided on, along with any training or implementation guidelines associated with that deliverable. So for nonprofits, it's important to involve all the necessary stakeholders in your organization in this stage, as implementation might involve multiple departments or roles at your organization. It's also important to try and have an implementation meeting. So again, aim to have a kickoff meeting and an implementation meeting during this delivery phase, where you just answer the question, what is your plan for taking and using this deliverable? During kickoff, you should have tried to identify the key elements to ensuring that you can actually use the product correctly, and that it continues to be beneficial to the organization long after the closing of the project. So it's time to review that list or those items that you might have made during kickoff, and ask yourself and the pro bono provider, what kind of training or information sharing needs to take place to make implementation of this deliverable ultimately successful? And if you're kind of wondering, we've armed you here with a delivery and implementation checklist that oftentimes you'll be able to use these to apply to any project you might be doing. And this checklist should really be prioritized in the delivery phase of your project. So you'll want to make sure that you delivered feedback in a timely manner and agreed on the final version of the deliverable together. Scheduled any necessary trainings for key staff or board members who are going to use this deliverable. Update all staff members on expected implementation. Update board members on expected implementation. Decide if the pro bono provider needs to be involved in the implementation. Reviewing any remaining activities and determine their dates and when you're going to do them. And then the nonprofit should review their plan on sharing out the information or resource that you've created with other relevant stakeholders, people that benefit from your programs, your funders, partner networks, members in your community, other organizations that you partner with. You might want to think about how you're going to message this to them as well. Aim to prioritize these things, as sometimes good implementation of the final product is just as important as the integrity of the final product itself. So don't scrimp on the implementation phase. A lot of these phases here that we cover after the delivery phase are kind of overlooked. So we like to spend some time going over them. What you do after the delivery phase can really ultimately be a part of making or breaking the project. And then the final phase in any given project is the evaluation and celebration phase. So like I said just a minute ago, this phase is often overlooked. But after the nonprofit and pro bono provider have worked for potentially weeks or maybe even months on a project together, you don't want the project to just fade away without the proper recognition, closure, and full-on celebration of it that it deserves. This is also your chance to really evaluate how the project went. And if you anticipate managing more pro bono partners or being on more pro bono projects in the future, this is where you can kind of take stock of your management of the project and maybe give yourself a grade or figure out what you need to improve on in the future. So definitely don't scrimp on this section either. Oftentimes nonprofits come to us wondering, okay, what are ways we can potentially celebrate the work that we did with the skilled volunteer? So I want to give you just a list of all the different types of things you as a nonprofit could do. So this one is mostly for the nonprofits on the line. I'm not going to read through all of these, but these are some great ideas on how to celebrate the work you did. Don't be afraid to get creative. The more unique to your mission the celebration is, I think the more meaningful the celebration or gift could potentially be. Oftentimes, just agreeing to be a reference for a skilled volunteer on any upcoming opportunities that they might be applying to, any upcoming jobs that they might be interested in, can work wonders. And a good celebration can also mean that volunteer stays in your network. Maybe they help you with other projects. Maybe they link up with people in their field who might be interested in your organization. And now you have more connections to more resources that can help your organization. So really, celebration is also key in retaining your pro bono volunteer as a lifelong supporter and kind of evangelist on behalf of your organization going forward. So think about creative ways. They don't necessarily have to be huge. Oftentimes celebrating can be very simple, but it really, really goes a long way in making sure that your skilled volunteer feels valued and good about the work that they did. We also want to touch on core evaluation criteria. So again, if you are giving yourself a grade on kind of how your project management went, these are evaluation criteria to think about and judge your project against. While your evaluation may cover a whole range of intended outcomes, all successful projects should pretty much have these characteristics. So you want to see if the project is completed and delivered in a timely manner. Did you make your deadline? The deliverable is implemented and sustainable. You know how you're going to use it. The nonprofit and the pro bono provider's expectations are met or even exceeded. That all parties involved report high satisfaction with the group's interactions, kind of how you work together. That the nonprofit reports that the project made an impact or will make an impact at their organization. And making sure you understand when the project is ultimately going to be done, and that was clear for both parties. So these are just the paramount core evaluation criteria that every project should judge itself against when you get to the evaluation and celebration phase here right at the end of the project. And again, these last two phases are kind of overlooked sometimes, but can be really, really important. You don't want to get a really good deliverable and then kind of scrimp on these phases and not see it all the way to the finish line. So this phase 5 is very, very important. So we like to emphasize that just as much as any of the other phases. So that really brings us to the end of the main kind of content we wanted to go over in setting up our principles of good pro bono project management and then going through these 5 phases of project management. Again, I think this structure works if you're managing a pro bono interaction for the very first time, or really any other pro bono projects, or projects in general. Maybe you want to apply some of these principles to your own team when you're doing projects internally at your organization. Those are things to think about as well. If you can transfer some of these principles, to a project that you're just working on internally. I find myself coming back to these as well, in just my day to day. So as promised, I wanted to leave a good amount of time here at the end for Q&A, and get all your questions and get those answered online, just to make sure we're able to answer as many questions online as possible. We will also have a recording of the chat log too. So if for some reason we maybe missed your question, we will try and follow up with you. There's also contact information right here if you want to get in touch with us. You can always reach out to our whole engagement team at help@taprootplus.org. I can also be reached at nonprofitsuccess@taprootfoundation.org. I know that is a bit of a keyboard full, but we'll keep that up there for a good long while. And again, you'll have this presentation in your back pocket as well. It looks like we got some questions coming in. We have a good amount of people on the line. So I'll probably go ahead and just take these questions by chat. If you have questions, go ahead and just drop them in the chat or the Q&A section. And I'm more than willing to take questions about Taproot Plus and Taproot in general as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be totally about project management. But if you're thinking about using pro bono or have questions just about how our system works, feel free to drop those in as well. One good question I know we've got is someone asking about, I guess, the nature of pro bono work and the types of things that they could get done pro bono. So could you have a volunteer executive director or a volunteer development director or an advisor on board development? Generally, the way Taproot Plus is structured and the way we facilitate pro bono, we don't recommend pro bono as a method for filling in just like open roles at an organization. Using pro bono as a substitute for full-time positions where you're just kind of assigning rolling duties. Pro bono engagements should be project-based. So you should have a clear end goal or final deliverable in mind. We generally don't recommend using our marketplace to hire or find a volunteer who's going to take on rolling duties or general duties as assigned. There should be an end goal that you are both working towards. That said, something like an advisor on board development, depending on what your board development needs are, those could turn into projects. So you might want to get help from someone who has a board recruitment background to create personas of the types of people that would best fit your board that you want to try and recruit for. Or you might want the help of a board developer in engaging in that recruitment effort. How do you tap into networks and approach people about joining your board? How do you make that pitch? Those are examples of projects that you could actually do with someone with an HR and kind of leadership background to enhance your board recruitment infrastructure. Another great question is, do we provide support in the event that a volunteer relationship falls through or maybe doesn't get off the ground or maybe something goes wrong? The answer is yes. So if you get linked up with a skilled volunteer through Taproot Plus, and let's say something happens, maybe that volunteer is a life event, which means they have to stop the project. Maybe communication, unfortunately, breaks down for some reason. We are definitely available. If you'll reach out to us at our help desk, we will try and work with you to get the project back up on the marketplace and see about sourcing another skilled volunteer. We'll probably ask you for some information about, how much work has been completed on the project. Do we need to start again at square one? But if anything like that ever does happen, that's when you should reach out to our help desk. Let us know. we can get the project back up on the marketplace and start boosting it out to other skilled volunteers who might be able to take over from where that person left off. So you're not completely left in the lurch if a skilled volunteer engagement does happen to go awry for whatever reason. Another great question that I know comes up that I see reflected in the chat is kind of around timelines and communication. I recommend trying to get out in front of a lot of those communications issues by using the tactic of pre-scheduling a designated time and place for actually doing checkup meetings. So this is a tactic we've found that's very, very, very successful for nonprofits that use it, which is at that kickoff meeting, they just go ahead and try and map out a designated time that you're going to be available for any check-ins that you're going to regularly do on a regular basis, even if it's just like a 5-minute check-in every Thursday afternoon, at 6 p.m. or something like that we're going to do via Zoom. Even if you don't think you need to check in, you'll find often that those check-ins can yield important things that you might not have been thinking about. Pre-scheduling a lot of those engagements and then committing to them can be a really good way to get out in front of any communications issues. As I think I called out on the presentation, communications issues are what we've seen as being kind of the number one thing that derails projects. Oftentimes, we'll find that neither the skilled volunteer nor the nonprofit actually detailed what their communications preferences were and how they were going to communicate with each other. And so it leads to situations where you have people saying things like, well, I was just assuming they'd get back to me. And then you reach out to the other person and they say, well, I was just assuming they would get back to me, which can be very, very frustrating. Get out in front of that very, very early if you possibly can. There's another great question about someone who's looks like they've listed a volunteer opportunity on our marketplace, but hasn't gotten any takers to that volunteer opportunity yet. I'd love to actually get eyes on that with you in a one-on-one context and see what we can do to maybe boost that project out. So like I said, we'll be sending a follow-up to this. If you want to drop us a message there and say, hey, I'm interested in getting more information or scheduling a one-on-one with me, I'd be happy to give you my link to where we can link up. There are some things we can do to help shake interest loose. So again, you can reach out to me at the Nonprofit Success email address or respond to our follow-up, and I can get in touch with you then and we can schedule something to dive into that project. I'd have to get eyes on it, take a further look at it to see what we might be able to do, if there's anything we can do to punch up the language or make it more attractive and compelling or clarify things. Consultants tend to be like really detail-oriented people. We can definitely take a look at that together. But I'll definitely want to get eyes on that. I'm available for a certain amount of one-on-ones. So definitely respond to our follow-up if you want to try and schedule one of those. Another good question. Could a volunteer help us develop a proposal for a startup to develop a special conflict resolution add-on? So this is, I think, an example of a type of project that you could get help on. It almost sounds like you're interested in maybe tapping into a business planning or business analysis skill set. You would definitely need to, think about the first elements of developing that proposal and maybe focus on that as your first project. So since this sounds like a pretty large initiative, a strategy that we like to recommend for tackling very large goals is to think about maybe breaking them down into more constituent projects. Constituent projects being kind of, okay, what are the big steps we're going to need to reach to tackle this very large goal? Like if you're developing a new program or something like that, as this question is kind of oriented towards. Instead of asking a single volunteer to help you develop this entire program from, sunset to sundown, it's better if you break it down into more discrete projects that link into each other. So maybe you start off with one project that kind of creates the foundation for the next one. Maybe your first project in developing this kind of proposal is just a market research project, to figure out, okay, are we creating something redundant? Is there another organization out here in this space close to us that already does this? Maybe you're doing a competitor collaborator analysis with a business professional, to figure out how to best position a new type of venture like this. You'd start out with that as a project, and then roll that kind of in the foundation to your as a foundation to your next project. That's a way you can leverage one-on-one pro bono engagements in a way that will allow you to tackle really large initiatives. So you could potentially get an entire website designed and developed with pro bono resources, but you'll have more success if you kind of break that down into steps rather than expecting one skilled volunteer to just design and develop an entire website for you, which is a pretty large undertaking. I use that as an example because oftentimes we find nonprofits underestimate how large of an undertaking that actually is. But yeah, large proposals or large kind of goals like that definitely can be tackled with pro bono support. You just might want to be really strategic in breaking it down into the various steps, and then kind of in a very agile way, accessing certain skill sets that'll help you at each step. When you're crafting a project post on Taproot Plus, and this goes back to the very first question we had, you want to really lead with the ultimate kind of finished product that you're looking for. So if you just come in and say, well, we need help with marketing, that's not going to be a very successful project post because that could mean 1,000 different things. You're going to want to really drill down on that. So what kind of marketing assistance are you looking for? What skill set do you not have? Maybe it's a graphic design need. Okay, what about your graphic design needs need help? Again, drilling down on that more and more till you can come up with something along the lines of, at the end of this project, the skilled volunteer and I will have created this, or whatever your proposed solution is. Another good question is about, can Taproot Plus help find volunteers for international grant writers? Yeah, so we usually get a question like this kind of once every presentation. So grant writing is something you can get assistance on from pro bono providers, from skilled volunteers. What I will say as a caveat to this is a very, very, very competitive skill set, meaning everyone and their mother is asking for help with grant writing. So we're never going to discourage you from asking for help for grant writing on a pro bono basis. But I just want to give the healthy expectation that it's easily the place where we find the most asymmetry with regard to supply and demand. There's a lot of nonprofits that need help with grant writing, obviously. And there's just kind of a small pool of people who are doing that kind of work on a pro bono basis. So, it's easily where we kind of, like I said, see, a lot of nonprofits asking for it. It's just a very competitive skill area. You might want to think about other types of projects could enhance fundraising efforts, just outside of those grant writing opportunities that you're going after. There are many different types of projects that you could embark on that will help you in various fundraising efforts by building fundraising infrastructure. So whether it's integrating a donation page into your website, or creating social media infographics or a crowdfunding campaign you're going to be doing. There's all types of projects you can use that are going to enhance your fundraising capacity. So think about those as well while you're thinking about asking for grant writing assistance. We do definitely facilitate grant writing projects. It's just, we have a small kind of pool of those skilled volunteers who are ultimately doing those kind of projects. Yeah, so I know we have a few more minutes, so let me know if you have any more questions that Kristen can boost out to me. But thanks everyone for being here. I know it can be a lot to dedicate an hour of your time, out of your busy work week. And it looks like that's it on the questions. But again, we'll be in touch. It looks like we do have a good question about, from the volunteer's perspective, about how to vet nonprofits. Yeah, so this is a great question, and I want this to speak to all the volunteers on the line as well. That I kind of went over, but when you're looking for nonprofits to work with, I think for most volunteers that we hear from when they say like what they're most attracted to, they are really attracted to projects where the nonprofit can, in detail, kind of map out what it is that they're looking for. If I was a volunteer, I'd be looking for, has this nonprofit thought really critically about their need? Do they have the resources that I'm going to need to actually successfully complete this project? Are they someone who's going to be a culture fit for my work style? So you might have the skills and experience as a skilled volunteer, but maybe, after you talk with the nonprofit, you schedule a meeting in Taproot Plus to kind of talk with them, and you figure out our timelines maybe aren't going to work out. Like maybe you have a hard stop coming up if you're like a freelancer for your next gig or something like that. So it's not just about having the right skills and experience. It's also about making sure the timeline matches up, making sure you feel comfortable potentially working with this person for several weeks or even up to a few months. Those are all things to consider as a volunteer, that you're going to be supported and that you trust that this nonprofit is going to give you the relevant information that you need, and is going to be a willing partner to co-manage this project with you. With pro bono projects, both you, whether you're a skilled volunteer or the nonprofit, are in the driver's seat. You're going to co-manage these projects with each other. So make sure you feel comfortable with co-managing a project with someone. So again, it just goes beyond just being interested in a nonprofit's mission. But that's also something that I think is at the core of it. If you're a skilled volunteer, I recommend trying to seek out cause areas and issue areas that you really care about, because that's going to help you keep a strong motivation throughout the project as well. So that's my advice from the volunteer standpoint, is asking for those things along, especially with details about timeline or any upcoming blockers the nonprofit might have. Are they going to have an executive leadership transition? Do they have like a big gala coming up in a month that's going to like occupy their time? Questions about timeline tend to be very important as well. So just keep that in mind. So yeah, let me know if, and we got a question about one of the slides. If we could see slide 20 again. I guess that's the types of discovery. We're going to boost this deck out to you as well in a PDF form, along with the actual recorded presentation. So you'll be able to go back and review kind of every single one of the slides. So you are going to be getting that in your inbox. So never fear, along with the rest of our follow-up goodies that we're going to send you. I know it looks like we're at time. I want to respect everyone's time, but thank you for being here and for being so engaged and interested. I hope you at least learn some things that you'll be able to apply to pro bono engagements, whether you're a skilled volunteer or a nonprofit. And again, reach out to us if you have any more questions. Be happy to hear from you all. And thanks for being here again, and we hope to see everyone online in the future. Have a good one. Bye, everyone.